Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your Board Game Doctor today. In this video, I will be reviewing Healthy Hearts Hospital. This game is a design by Scott and Anne-Marie Nelson. That is a 2023 design, but this is for the 3rd edition. It was originally designed back in 2015, which was another re-implementation of an earlier design of the Nelsons called Triage. So, before I get into any of the gameplay highlights, I do want to mention as well that Healthy Heart Hospital has a campaign going for it, not a Kickstarter campaign, but a print-and-play legacy-style campaign that you can play through that is available for those interested. If you reach out to Scott Nelson on Board Game Geek, he will hook you up with the files to be able to play this. This is called Full Moon, is the name of this campaign, and so it's another way to play Healthy Heart Hospital with different objectives and a somewhat cohesive story woven in through this hospital. So a link will be posted below to the Board Game Geek website where you can contact Scott and receive a print-and-play version of this campaign. Now, going into the game, as an overview, you are cooperating with other players. This is a cooperative game to treat patients and take administration actions of the so-called Healthy Heart Hospital. You hope to treat patients, gain money, research new technology, open new hospital rooms, and upgrade your staff, all hopefully trying to prevent deaths, which not only lose you money, but if you lose too many people at the hospital, you will run out of room to fit the bodies, and that will trigger the end of the game in a losing condition. So let's go through some of the highlights of how this game works. First, how do you treat patients? So each player, first of all, has an asymmetric doctor that has specific abilities to treat patients with, and they span the disciplines across 5 different areas of medicine, including infectious disease, surgery, trauma, etc. And when you decide to treat, you draw cubes from a bag. You decrease the illness level of a patient when you draw their colored cube, but if you draw a black cube, their illness gets worse. So you can mitigate this with staff upgrades and training markers, etc., to add more abilities to your own doctor to hopefully treat patients better, hence drawing better cubes from the bag. But you can also, due to certain abilities, rebag cubes after you've treated the patient to hopefully draw the colors that you would hope to draw to cure the patient on a subsequent turn. In this game, you can also take administration actions. So while everyone has a specific doctor character, everyone shares one administrator card, which also has unique abilities to be able to gain those staff upgrade tokens, which help in all different aspects of the game. And speaking of which, as you progress through the game, round by round, you flip over 2 new staff upgrade tokens, of which you can purchase. But sometimes some of these tokens are blank or just cat tokens, which have no ability on it. They just serve as a filler and as a distractor for you to be able to find more upgrades to purchase along the way. And then the patient phase of the game. So I've mostly described the treatment and administration phase of the game, where you take actions, but then you transition to a patient phase where you do upkeep with the game, which also increases the difficulty throughout the game. So after you take your own actions, you go through the wards, the different floors for which patients are located in, and you draw cubes from a bag to increase their illness severity. Some of these wards will also have randomized abilities or effects when you take this phase. You will be able to do other things to increase the severity of illness, or provide alleviating circumstances of which you do not have to add cubes. It is randomized and changed from game to game. Also, you add cubes to a waiting area, and so the quantity of patients will ever increase throughout the game, and your goal is not only to treat patients, but to room these waiting patients who may get sicker and sicker if you don't put them into a room and start treating them, thus backing up the waiting room and potentially leading to deaths and loss of money in that regard. Now, to compare this game to others, as a cooperative game, obviously, this game mechanically compares to Pandemic, but it also somewhat compares in theme, not only in the curing of illness, but also in the separation of phases, where you take actions during one phase to mitigate and cure the disease or the patients in Healthy Heart Hospital, and then that transitions to an upkeep phase where the difficulty ramps up and more patients or more disease is spread throughout the board for you to try to wrangle in. There is a randomness element to it as well, to both games, offering a very tense moment of discovery of what may happen next for you to tactically try to handle in the subsequent round. Other medical games, of course, such as Clinic and Dice Hospital, share similarities. This is not an all-inclusive list. These are just two of the medical-related games that came to mind first. All of these games offer, including Healthy Heart Hospital, offer a more administrative view of the hospital simulation, but also include treatment of patients in a variety of ways. As mentioned before, the treatment portion is tracked in Healthy Heart Hospital by drawing cubes from a bag, and it's kind of similar in a way to Dice Hospital, but the randomness of Dice Hospital is solely the assignment of patients to different players after these dice have been rolled to determine their illness severity. Whereas in Healthy Heart Hospital, patients kind of start at a lower end, and as quickly as you can get them in and be treated, you can keep that relatively low. Whereas if they are in the waiting room for a long time and then brought into the treatment, or if you don't treat them effectively, their illness will increase over time. I would say for complexity's sake, Healthy Heart Hospital is more aligned with Dice Hospital and Pandemic than it is Clinic. But Clinic and Healthy Heart Hospital share some similarities in the diversity of specialized rooms that you can build onto your hospital as you acquire them through the game. Also in the fact that you track money as the key victory condition, not only to survive for 6 rounds, but you can kind of compare your score at the end of Healthy Heart Hospital from previous games by how much money you have saved at the end of the game. So going into my impression, I do want to preface this too, that obviously I am a physician, and even though I do not work in a major hospital, I was trained in one, and so I don't have any administrative duties that would pertain directly to a major hospital system as is simulated in this game, but I can extrapolate based off of my own experiences and the experiences of my colleagues in a hospital environment. Mechanically, this is a really fun game with all the makings of a good cooperative game in the same vein as Pandemic. If you enjoy Pandemic, I think you will enjoy this game as well, both in theme, the complexity, and the way that the game ramps through the different rounds, creating more challenging things that you need to tackle as you go along in the game. Of course, this game is abstracted to fit the theme of hospital administration and patient care, so there are some liberties that are taken to make the game flow better and just to play better on the table. And that's totally fine. I think those are necessary to make a game feel very familiar and playable to all audiences of this game. But I just want to point out a few things that I think both reflect and or contradict how medicine is practiced in real life from my own experience. So the randomness of treating patients by drawing cubes out of a bag creates a mechanically interesting, intense action to take in the game. And it centralizes around this action based off of how well you are able to treat a patient. And you also have the aspect of trying to maximize the thought of, as you take cubes out of the bag, you will see what cubes are taken out, and therefore may be able to kind of guess on how many cubes are left within the bag to pinpoint your best efforts to certain patients. But you also have different abilities and the rebag mechanism to place better cubes into the bag to hopefully increase the odds of drawing what you need. And for a game, that's awesome. Now, in real life, of course, every patient is different with various underlying and chronic conditions on top of the acute issues that led them to the hospital. But most facilities and personnel treating patients are very well equipped, both with equipment and knowledge, to treat and cure patients. It is very rare that a chronically ill patient simply worsens while at the hospital without an acute event complicating matters. So the randomness of a patient getting worse or better may fit some patients' experiences, but it's not conducive for every single patient in the hospital. In the future, I would be very interested in a game where patients themselves were composed of a more complex system of problems to be solved, and less often treated with randomness as a key factor, as is seen in this game, as well as other games like Dice Hospital, with the rolling of the dice to determine severity, but a more, an approach of a more deterministic approach based off of the resources available at the facility. It would be really interesting to see that kind of aspect where you can treat a patient very effectively, and maybe there are some events that make it a little bit more difficult, but the element of the gameplay and the mechanisms involved would not revolve around randomness in treating a patient where they may get better or worse, but perhaps a patient will eventually get better, but perhaps if you assemble the hospital in a way and your personnel in a way that you can treat more patients in a quicker and more effective way, that would get you more points in the end, or something like that. Second, specifically as a pathologist, in my experience, I find it interesting in a very much wholehearted way. I'm not throwing any shade to the Nelsons or anyone, but in this game, the pathologist is, or I guess surrounding pathology, that one of the main ways that this game ends, or the trigger for losing this game, is running out of space to fit bodies in the morgue, or by losing money on settlements based on malpractice for each death. So those are the two ways that you can lose this game. Now, this perfectly makes sense for the game, and I'm not, again, mad about that or anything. And I do acknowledge that patients die at the hospital every day, but to my knowledge, I don't think of many of those deaths and those situations end up in a circumstance where litigation leads to settlements and money lost on the hospital's part. Now, I've performed autopsies on patients who have died at the hospital, but most of those were at the behest of the family, wanting answers and closure for their loved one. A very small minority of those cases were to try to find medical mistakes in particular. I would say a large majority of them as well were prompted by the physicians themselves to look for a certain underlying condition that may have led to the death. But there was a very small amount of those cases that I did that there was even an inkling of an opportunity to find a medical mistake that surgery or internal medicine made. And so even if that wasn't the focus of those cases, I found that we didn't find anything untoward towards the treatment of the patient. It was ultimately left up to the underlying conditions and the severity of the illness of the patient as they came into the hospital. And the physicians would always, as a part of the oath of beneficence, we try to do the most that we can for patients and use all the options that are feasible and available. But sometimes that isn't the case. So I guess that kind of does tie into the whole aspect of the randomness of drawing cubes out of a bag. I think that does reflect in some small part what may happen in real life, but I think it's closer to actually what Dice Hospital does, where the severity is determined before the patient enters the building, the hospital, and then from there they are slowly treated and made better throughout time. Now back to the deaths as well. I feel like a lot of patients who do unfortunately die at the hospital aren't, once again, in a situation where that would lead to a litigation. Now, it does happen, of course, and I think the minority of these cases, or these cases comprise a minority of outcomes that are more publicly vocalized in media. But for the most part, when patients do die, it's under the pretense and the knowledge that everything was done for the patient, and usually patients are switched over to hospice and comfort care before they pass away. And so I do think that it is a little bit of a stretch that as people die at the hospital, your hospital loses reputation and money because of that. And so I see where it's, the game is coming from to make that something that you avoid. And of course, at a hospital, you don't want to be known to have, a lot of deaths that may be, leading to a correlation that patients won't like. But I think it would be interesting in the future as a victory point condition or a marker of success in the game. Instead of victory points or money or least amount of deaths, it would be things like patient satisfaction, which may or may not be a part of clinic to a degree. But aside from money, having patients be treated quickly and with good care and good bedside manner, that would lead to more patients wanting to be treated at your facility. And if you had more ways to treat different patients with better technology and better equipment to handle things like strokes or a cath lab to help patients with heart issues, things like that. If you're well equipped and well rounded as a hospital, you can welcome any type of patient, and you don't have to send them to a different hospital for care and risking the timing effect of a patient to be too acute and suffering a little bit too much before they got the right care. And so and that's another point of this game too. Like, you slowly build out rooms into your hospital to be able to treat patients a little bit better, and these rooms are areas of the hospital such as the blood bank or the ER, example. And I would assume that most hospitals, if they are up, and functioning before welcoming patients in, they have at least the bare bones of a lot of these rooms anyway to be able to handle as many patients as possible. And so it would be interesting. And once again, I understand why this is a part of the game. It creates a little bit of an alleviation of the ramping of difficulty as you go throughout the game and treating patients, more and more patients who may get sicker. But it would be interesting that if you could draft these rooms at the beginning of the game and lay them all into your hospital to create an identity of what your hospital is known for and successful with. And so if you are able to attract more of those types of patients and treat them effectively, that would garner you more points in your abilities and strengths, rather than having to build that over time and randomly assign different buildings, which in real life, realistically, you probably would already have in the game. And so I know a lot of these medical games have an aspect of you building out your hospital from something very basic to something that ultimately, in my opinion, is what a hospital that is functioning and serving patients well in today's age. And also from my perspective in the United States, that is my perspective on medicine, so take that as you will. But those buildings they already have those rooms, and those specialized rooms per se, already built before taking in patients. So it'd be interesting to jump forward to that scenario where you do have those rooms, but then how you utilize those rooms and how you attract, or not attract, but how you welcome in patients and treat them effectively at your institution will lead to, how effective you are and how many victory points you gain, for example. So overall, this is a very sound cooperative game that plays really well, and while learning and playing the game, I had the chance to reflect on how medicine is portrayed in the tabletop board game format. And I hope that one day that additional perspectives lead to a game that have the player view the simulation more from the doctor's true perspective, or from a ever more realistic simulation of what administration of a hospital looks like as well. Once again, with the treatment-related aspects of medical games, where it's typically left a lot to chance whether a patient gets better or worse, but rather in a future game, I would like to see it where the patients will ultimately continue to get better, and I think this is more reflective in Dice Hospital, but how quickly you get them to be better is how you equate it to victory points. But also, having a hospital like pre-drafted and built already, rather than building up to a facility that is renowned, you start with that, and then how you manage the hospital from there is what leads to you gaining points. So that's for, hopefully in the future we can see something like that, but for the time being, this is a great cooperative game. If you like Pandemic, I think you'll like this game as well. Thank you for consulting with me today, and hope that you schedule an appointment with your board gaming doctor real soon. Take care.